The WJEC specification asks you to study one religious mystic as an example of mysticism in practice. We will be looking at the life and mysticism of St. Teresa of Avila. You will get to use her in the examination in one of two ways. Either you can use her to exemplify the nature or characteristics and types of mystical experience, or you could get a question asking for you to specifically describe her life and mysticism. In terms of the life of St. Teresa, she was born in Spain in 1515 and was raised by her father as a Roman Catholic. She didn't remain devout throughout her whole childhood, but went through a period of rebellion in her teenage years. At the age of 16, she was sent to convent school where she made the decision to become a nun of the Carmelite order. However, shortly after this, she became ill and remained so for a long time. She was plagued by illness really for the rest of her life, and during her illness, while she was incapacitated, she began the practice of contemplative prayer. This practice gave her a sense of inner peace, and she describes surrendering to the will of God. These experiences were accompanied by additional religious phenomenon, such as visions. The other nuns and priests met these with a mixed reception, and it seemed to frighten St. Teresa, so she lost confidence in this kind of prayer for some time. However, at the age of 41, she was encouraged to resume her contemplative prayer and found this to transform her life. She regained a renewed sense of oneness or unity with God, and she recalled that at these times she felt so transformed that she felt as though God's presence would wash her soul away, and at times she was so filled with the Holy Spirit that she would levitate spontaneously. She did not welcome this and used to ask the other nuns to sit on her so that she wouldn't float away. We can clearly see some of the characteristics and types of mysticism present in St. Teresa's experiences from among the scholarly ideas that we had a look at earlier. For instance, James describes mystical experiences as being passive. St. Teresa didn't welcome or desire these experiences, they happened to her. Nuns and priests often were fearful and discouraged her prayerful practices. Having said this, it did seem to be prayer that precipitated these experiences, and she largely continued to pursue contemplative prayer. James said that such experiences were ineffable. We cannot use ordinary language to explain them. St. Teresa uses a lot of analogy and language that is specifically religious in order to describe and convey information from her experiences. It is not straightforward factual language, but more subjective or interpretive. It's emotional language that conveys feelings or abstract ideas. Here we have an example where she's talking of Christ and she says, "It is not a radiance which dazzles, but a soft whiteness and infused radiance. It is a kind, indeed, that no one could in the whole course of his life imagine. It is as it is." This is very ineffable language. It is difficult for the hearer to grasp really what it is that St. Teresa is trying to describe. James describes the experiences as noetic. Teresa continually and certainly claimed to have gained knowledge about God, prayer, or our relationship with God as a result of the experiences she had. And to convey this information, she wrote several books and taught other nuns in the art of contemplative prayer. This information is conveyed in a rather emotive, analogical manner, and the knowledge appears to be such that it cannot be established via reason or empiricism. James described mystical experiences as being transient, and certainly St. Teresa did not remain in these ecstatic states all the time. Whilst the experiences did seem to have lasting effects, she was able to resume normal activity within the convent, and so the experiences themselves did pass. Stace identified introvertive and extrovertive experiences, and St. Teresa's experiences can certainly be described as introvertive. Her practical guide to contemplative prayer demonstrates the three most important virtues for a prayerful life. The first of these, fraternal love, is like agape. She speaks at length about this passionate love for both God and fellow human as a lasting kind. This encourages the believer to look within themselves at their attitudes, not to seek out favouritism or self-seeking love, but to treat people equally. Secondly, Teresa taught detachment. This was more attention. This was to move attention and attachments away from earthly, temporary things and towards God. One must give up favouritism for individual people or belongings, and even from ourselves or our own bodies. This is actually quite similar to the teaching found in Eastern religions, such as Buddhism. Thirdly, she teaches true humility. This is understanding one's own inadequacies and giving oneself up to God's authority. All these three virtues are introspective, looking inwards at the self rather than outwards, and encouraging certain behaviours or attitudes and awareness rather than connections with the external world. We've spoken of theistic mysticism. St. Teresa's mysticism is clearly theistic. She focuses primarily upon attaining union with the God of Christianity rather than some spiritual force that remains unidentified. Her teaching is consistent with the Bible and with the Roman Catholic Church, and it is worth noting that she was investigated by the Spanish Inquisition and yet was not seen as a threat. Also, as Saint Teresa of Avila, she was canonised as a saint by the Roman Catholic Church, so is held up as a proponent of traditional theism. In St. Teresa's work, The Interior Castle, she speaks at length of what she has learned as a result of her experiences. She envisages the soul as a kind of castle made from a diamond which has many facets or rooms inside. The journey of contemplative prayer to St. Teresa is much like the journey through the castle from room to room. One has the goal of reaching the centre and attaining union with God, but you cannot go straight there. Instead, the journey is long and involves movement through every room before reaching the middle. The first mansion is where the soul enters through the door via prayer and meditation. The soul at this point is created in the image and likeness of God, but is still attached to the world with all its distractions and evils. It is a long way from the warmth of the innermost mansion. The first few mansions are cold, a long way from God, and much time and work is spent on these, toiling and learning to become ready. In the second mansion, whilst there are still distractions from the world, time is spent seeking out sermons and writings, prayers, and trying to become fit for the journey. By the fourth mansion, the soul no longer has to work alone. There's assistance. It does get easier. It is still possible to go back, but gradually the soul gets used to the requirements of the journey and begins to find it easier. As the soul travels further inwards towards the fifth and sixth mansions, it begins to become closer and closer to union with God. More and more time is spent in contemplative prayer, and God bestows favours or mystical experiences upon the soul. In the seventh mansion, union is attained. Teresa compares this to spiritual marriage. There is a complete transformation, perfect peace. In the four waters, we can see parallels with the seven mansions. She is referring again to the spiritual journey whilst a person progresses in contemplative prayer. She compares the soul to a garden and likens us to gardeners tending to plants. In the first water, through prayer, we water the garden of our soul with a bucket. This is hard work. We have to be disciplined and concentrate. Sometimes the well is empty and we have to wait for water to come. Sometimes we can't understand something and we must wait for God to reveal it to us. In the second water, it is like a windlass. This is a kind of winding pulley. We still have to use the bucket, but it's easier, and we're fitter for the task due to all the hard work we did earlier. Our efforts are more easily rewarded, and we have more frequent and fuller understanding. In the third water, we need to use even less effort. Like a river or stream running through the garden, knowledge and understanding from God flow to us. God takes over much of the hard work, and our soul begins to flourish. The fourth water is rain. Here we achieve union. We can fully rest in God's presence, and we make no effort or strain. This is the goal of all mystical prayer, according to St. Teresa.